What's going on, guys? Well, it's finally time. The axle's coming tomorrow. About to start getting the Dana 35 pulled out of our 2004 TJ Wrangler, so stay tuned. So we've got the Jeep where we want it in the garage to sit for a few days. I'm about to start pulling this Dana 35 axle out of our Jeep in preparation for a brand new 44. Never thought the day would come. So I'm going to get the wheels and tires pulled off where we can see up under there pretty good, and then we'll go over everything that we have to get disconnected in order to get this axle pulled. First thing you're going to want to do once the wheels and tires are off is we're going to take our 6-ton jack stands, the big boys, and put them as far back on the frame as you can, probably right before this lower control arm bracket. Want to get the back as high up as we can before we do that though, so we have full room to droop this axle out to get the coil springs out and everything. So I'm going to go up a little higher with the jack, and then we're going to place these 6 tons on the frame. Alright, we have the weight of the Jeep being supported on the 6-ton jack stands. We have our jack under the rear axle. So now we can really start looking at how we want to tackle getting everything out of here. Just starting with a list of stuff we have to get disconnected. Obviously both the parking brake and the rear brakes. Our new axle's coming with plumbed rear brakes already. We're going to disc, so this entire brake system needs to come out. So that's probably going to be number one. We have a sway bar to disconnect. We will probably disconnect it from the axle right here where it runs through that bushing. So brakes, sway bar. Obviously we're going to have to disconnect our shocks. That's no big deal. We've got a track bar to disconnect. This angled relocation bracket is probably not going to be reused with the new axle. The new axle comes with the track bar bracket built for the CV style rear end where the axle is tilted back. So we're likely going to ditch this relocation bar, so we'll just leave it on the axle. All we have to do is disconnect this bolt here holding the track bar on. Once the shocks are disconnected, we can droop the axle and hopefully pull our coil springs out. Obviously the drive shaft will have to come off. We've done a drive shaft video. That's just 4 little, I believe they're 8mm bolts. Let's see, brakes, sway bar, shocks, track bar, drive shaft. I believe at that point we will have everything off other than the control arms. So we will go ahead and droop the axle down, get all this stuff out, pull it back up, and axle and ride height is your best shot at getting these things off easily. So control arms will come last, and that is, I think, going to be our plan of attack on this thing. So I think we're going to start with the brakes. So here we have our brake line connection. This is the rear axle. Brake line's running up this way towards the front of the Jeep. This is actually our rear locker wire that's zip tied to it, so we're going to cut these ties. We need our rear locker wire to stay because our new axle's coming with an Eaton in it, so we're just going to hopefully be able to plug it up with no issues. So we need to cut this off, and then we have to break this connection right here. This is your hard brake line running up towards the front of the Jeep. So when you break this connection and pull this off, there's obviously going to be some brake fluid coming out of here, so have a bucket or something. And then it looks like this bracket right here actually attaches to the frame, so we're going to break that loose, break this loose, and then that should handle our brake lines. Up here we have our parking brake cables. There's 2 They both come in from either side of the Jeep. You're supposed to be able to back this nut all the way off that keeps tension on these cables, and then slip them out of this bracket and then pinch these in, and they're supposed to slide back through this little bracket here. So oddly enough, I've heard this is the biggest pain in the butt of this job, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's your two brake line connections. You've got your regular brakes, and then you've got your parking brake cables. So we're gonna start with the regular brakes, but I wanted to go ahead and show you how this is supposed to work. So we're gonna start taking our parking brake off, running this bolt back that holds tension on the parking brake cables. It should be a 9/16. Actually, it's a half. All you're doing here is taking pressure off of the parking brake cables to where we will be able to slip the ends up out of this bracket. As you can see, we got both parking brake cables out. Wasn't too bad. Like I said, this tab right here, you have to pinch. There's 3 prongs on it, and it slides through this bracket. You have to pinch all 3 in and then push it out. Obviously, after disconnecting it from this bracket, this is what keeps tension on it and actually runs up through the floor to the parking brake. Now that that's done, we're gonna move over here and disconnect the hard brake line. This connection here is your hard brake line connection like we talked about earlier. This bracket's bolted to the frame, so you obviously have to disconnect that screw and then break the connection here, which is a 7/16. This is a hard line, so you have to use a open-end wrench. And then that should pull this brake line out. And like I said, you'll have some fluid come out of here, so we're about to grab a bucket. All right, as you can see, we took the bracket off the frame, attaching the brake line going to the axle. We pulled that off, screwed it back in so we wouldn't lose it. Then we broke our brake line connection, and it is sitting there dripping pretty steadily. So I'm sure it'll run out eventually. In the meantime, we're going to next pull our drive shaft off the pinion yoke. So to get the rear of the drive shaft off of the pinion yoke, it just takes an 8mm socket. We just put these on too, so should be a pretty easy part. There's a second one. Once that's out, probably have to get something to pry on this, but the drive shaft should be able to pop right out. Alright, just let the drive shaft hang. I'm going to get some tape and actually tape these end caps on. I just had one shoot off on me. You don't want these to come out and get needle bearings everywhere, because that'll ruin the U-joint. That should work. It's never the right size the first time, is it? Looks like this is going to be a 15. What we're doing now is removing the rear sway bar. I've already got it disconnected from the frame. You have to pull it off the axle too, obviously. I'm not even sure if we're going to put a sway bar back on the thing. We may. I may ride a few times and see how it performs without one, because we've got the anti-rock on the front, so may need to get the bigger ratchet for this too. Yeah, that's gonna need the bigger ratchet. So like I said, these are two 15 mils that hold this on, and this lower one is in there. Had to get my big cheater bar. I may actually blast that with some PB Blaster. Shouldn't be that difficult. It's the first bolt I've hit so far that is worse than it should be. Not sure why. Let that soak a minute. That PB Blast usually works like a charm. Not sure why that lower bolt was so difficult. Alright. This side's off. Time to get the other side off. Alright, both sides of the sway bar are disconnected. So at this point it's just kind of dangling here. Let's see what the easiest way to get this joker out of here is going to be. Careful not to wrap it up in any of your wires. And there it goes. Alright, you guys have seen us take these rear shocks off before. I'm using a 15 mil, same one for the sway bar on the end of our big ratchet, and then a 19 mil on the backside to hold the nut. And we just had these off fixing the rear coil buckets. So, as expected, it wasn't bad. The only part I'm worried about on this Jeep are the control arm connections, as far as being difficult to get off. Alright, there's one rear shock. Go pull the left side off and we'll be ready to pull the coils. Alright, both shocks are disconnected. I'm going to slowly droop the axle with the hope that we get some relief in our coils and can get them out. Here we go. Alright gang, so where we're at now is all that is holding the axle on is the control arms. Even though you can't tell it, well yeah you can. The track bar is disconnected. I actually had to disconnect that to get this coil out. With the track bar in, this side would not droop enough for me to get the coil out. So pulled that. It was a 16 millimeter bolt. Wasn't too bad. Kind of had to manipulate the axle a little bit in order to get that to drop out of there. So yeah, this is where we are. Got to get these control arms disconnected. I've got a wire holding the Eaton locker cable on that is just going to unclip right there on the diff. And then this joker will be out of here. All right, first, I'm going to show you the setup I've got. I've actually got the axle on 2 jack stands close to ride height because that's where you're supposed to have the easiest time pushing these bolts out of the control arms. Then I've got my jack under the pinion right there because as soon as you turn this thing loose, it has the tendency to drop like that because the pinion's so heavy. So I've got it supported several ways. We're about to pull the upper control arms off and start there. All right, the upper control arm, it's a 15 millimeter on both sides. So I'm using my cheater bar on the back and just an open-ended wrench on the front. Switch to the normal ratchet now. Should be able to back this on out of here. Good, I can turn that bolt, which means we're not in a super high bind. And out she comes. One down, 3 to go. All right, now we're working on the lower. It's the same side we already removed the upper. The lower is gonna be a 21 millimeter on both sides. Again, open end wrench on this side. Socket with a breaker bar on the back. I believe the torque's pretty high on these, so. Oh yeah, it's coming though. There it goes. Switch to our normal ratchet. Back her on off. Oh yeah. We're at the perfect height, I guess, where we're not in a bind on these bolts. I tried to get it close to ride height. Look at that. That bolt just slips right out of there. Alright guys, our right side control arms are off. Got this little crate, got from Harbor Freight, just a little dolly. All of our control arm bolts are loose. Pulled them out just now. If I'm not mistaken, everything's off. So it's about to be moment of truth. I'm gonna get this under the chunk. Then I'm gonna slowly lift each side up, pull the jack stand, and the hope is that the axle falls onto this dolly and we can just pull it out of here. Good news, the Dana 35 is out of the Jeep. Looks like we didn't miss anything, and if we did, I certainly didn't hear any pops as we pulled. That's a joke. All empty and ready for a Dana 44. We're pumped. This was a solid little axle though, for how much crap the Dana 35s take. Whoever gets this one's gonna get a decent little axle, especially if you stay on 33s or 35s. All right, it's out. I'm gonna get the tools and the Jeep cleaned up a little bit, prepped for the 44 to come in on Monday. And then we'll get this swap on the way. All right, guys, turn around here. There she is. The Dana 35 is out of the TJ. Super excited. Dana 44, like I said, should be here in a day or two. Get it swapped in, and then we will be taking the Jeep up to the shop to have 488s put in the front, because we ordered our new axle with 488s, and obviously they have to match. So hope you learned something today in the removal video. Sorry I did not capture every single millisecond of every step. I'm a one-man show. Some of that can get a little bit complicated trying to film and do at the same time. But we got it out. Like I said, super pumped. Stay tuned for the install video of the 44, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching Everyday Off-Road.